Today is Thursday, December 8th. It's the feast of the Immaculate Conception. And this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. This morning, I woke up and took a few minutes to flip through the news headlines to see what's going on, and there was an interesting article, I think it was in the New York Times, about a crisis that's being realized in the modern school system. There's a crisis. I know that this is developing because I've talked about it with my own kids who are in college. The technology available today is undermining the educational system. The technology is moving beyond the powers that Google made available to students. And now that we're getting into artificial intelligence being used to actually do things by means of computers and the internet, bots or software applications can make use of artificial intelligence engines to produce written content on the fly, on demand. So a student can type in a question and the bot can compose an answer to the question based on knowledge acquired through internet searches and all of the usual search engine crawling through websites and articles and image databases and so on. And these artificial intelligent bots can pull information from all of these sources just as Google does in a Google search, but it can do so intelligently using human responses to information to become more and more accurate according to what's called user intent. So for example, if I enter a search term in Google and search the internet, let's say I search for Catholic homeschooling, Google will run its search and provide results to my search that it thinks I would be interested in. It takes my search term and it doesn't merely match words to articles and show the results. It's not that simple. It's much more complicated than that. But Google will take my search term and then consider what the intention of my search is, then provide results that it believes matches my intention, what I'm actually looking for. So for example, if I type in Catholic homeschooling, Google will not assume that I'm looking to buy a product. It won't give me results that are online stores or Amazon products and things like that. It'll give me links to websites with information about Catholic homeschooling. You can go ahead and try a search and see if I'm right. It will judge the intent of the user initiating the search and will try to provide results that the user is actually interested in. That's what makes Google so effective. It's good at guessing user intent. And for the past 10, 15 years or so, we've enjoyed the powers that Google has made possible for us. But that's old technology. The new technology is taking this to a new level. Google could search a database of existing websites and provide links to content that was created by other people. But artificial intelligence goes a step further and composes the content on the spot, composes the content on demand. And so artificial intelligence is like Google on steroids, just cutting out the whole search process and giving us the answers directly. Now, the problem for schools is that before, students could use Google to enter a question or a search term and get links to websites and web pages that had information, Wikipedia articles, and so on. Students could copy the content and paste it and submit it with assignments or writing exercises. And teachers who actually read their students' work and know the students personally could discern that the answers were not the students' own words, were not the students' own thoughts. Even in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, I've had to do this many times. I can tell that an answer to a question did not come from our lesson content and did not come from the mind of the student. The benefit for teachers is that they could simply copy that line or paragraph, whatever, that they suspected to be copied, paste it into Google, and find the original source. It was quite easy to catch lazy kids cheating because they were copying the work of someone else and pasting it and presenting it as their own work. And this, of course, is plagiarism. So Google and the internet gave students a very great capability for cheating, and much of this could get by lazy teachers without getting caught. Or teachers could just choose to look the other way and not care. But now, with artificial intelligence bots composing answers to questions, this becomes infinitely more complicated, because the artificial intelligence bots are not going to repeat the same answers word for word. It's always going to be new. It's always going to be composed on the spot. And so students are going to be able to simply enter in questions and get a customized response composed by an artificial intelligence bot that they can then copy and paste. And this could be an answer to an individual comprehension question. This could be the definition of a term. This could be an entire essay composed on the fly by an artificial intelligence bot. And the students can even control all different aspects of that composition. They could choose the grade level at which it would be composed, the vocabulary level, sources, on and on. Now, I've been learning about this through my own kids who are in college, because I've noticed them making use of all different kinds of tools, and I've asked them about it. They've talked to me about all these different tools and resources, and I see them advertised. For example, there's a tool on Bartleby website which can solve math problems. Obviously, if you're online at all, you know about Grammarly and how you can type terribly poor English and simply hit a button, and Grammarly will correct not just the spelling, not just a spell check, but correct grammar, suggest other ways of expressing ideas, on and on. And so when we receive written work from students online, we really have no idea what's theirs and what's not theirs. The technology has created a crisis in modern schools. Recently, talking to my oldest son, I asked him about the fact that it's so easy to cheat, and what do professors actually do? And I often ask them about how the professors assess their work, what kind of assignments they're doing, and things like that. And I'm always shaking my head saying, they have to know that the majority of the students are cheating. And my son told me that one of his professors actually tells the kids up front, I don't care how you get it done, just get it done. And so there's almost, it seems, a surrendering of the educators to this modern technology. They're not even going to try and fight against it. And what I'd like to focus on in this, what I'd like to talk about, is the fact that what we're seeing in modern education is the necessary consequence of modern education. The error of moving away from classical education was not visible in past generations because there still could be an appearance of serious learning or strict assessment requirements, even though the true goal of education was abandoned by modern education, and a cheap counterfeit accepted in its place and promoted throughout the world. The original goals of classical, philosophical, and theological education was abandoned in the 1600s at the time of the scientific revolution and the Protestant Revolution, and then even more radically with the founding of America and the installation of democratic government, and then the invention of the public schools in the 1800s. The original goals of education were all abandoned and replaced with worldly, shallow counterfeits. And like I said, in the past, schools were able to get away with this and maintain an appearance of seriousness because the students were dependent on books and local schools. It was easy to monitor the students' work and to some degree make sure that students were learning something. But as technology has developed, the fraud of this modern education is now being exposed. The shallowness of the modern curriculum is being exposed by the fact that bots can answer the questions. Bots can complete the assignments. And while the teachers and maybe even the parents will fuss and complain about this, and they'll basically turn these schools into institutions that prohibit the kids from using available technology, just like they did in math classes 20 years ago when we weren't allowed to use calculators, and they pretended like to really understand math, you had to write your answers without using a calculator, which was, of course, a bunch of nonsense. Any math that can be solved with a calculator should be, because there's no higher purpose in learning modern practical arithmetic. There's no higher purpose. It's practical. That's the whole point of modern arithmetic. We're no longer talking about the nature of numbers. We're no longer talking about the different species of quantity as we do in classical mathematics in the quadrivium. We're just talking about the operations, calculating with numbers, maybe getting into some abstract mathematics and algebra for the sake of the use of formulas in the modern sciences. And even that is being exposed as technology continues to advance. That this image that the physics professor was some kind of genius and the ancient philosopher was some kind of superstitious weirdo is being exposed as a fraud by the work that computers can do, and how much technology calls into question by its much more thorough operations than this modern natural science. So the false appearances of modern education are being exposed by this advancing technology. The nature of modern education, which is inferior to the true potential of human education, is being exposed as being unworthy of humans and capable of being carried out by machines. And what's different about artificial intelligence, in the past, computers were criticized because someone had to put the information into the computer to bring about a result. And we always understood that computers were subordinate to human thinking. Even Google requires search keywords to be entered, and they have to be entered intelligently. If you enter nonsense, you're not going to get good search results. People who get good search results are good at searching. But all Google can do is return content that's been prepared by men. But artificial intelligence changes that. Because in artificial intelligence, the computers are now studying themselves. They're taking record of human activities and human decisions. They're learning from human responses. And what they learn, they then use to direct their future responses, and the ability for the computers to learn in this way greatly exceeds, almost infinitely exceeds, the ability of human beings to learn and grow in this way. If you'd like to learn a little bit about artificial intelligence, what I recommend is that you go on YouTube and search for Elon Musk talking about artificial intelligence, because he's one of the leaders in this field. And he's working to apply artificial intelligence in modern industries, in modern applications. So I recommend you search on YouTube for some interviews with Elon Musk where he talks about the potential of artificial intelligence. You'll notice that as he talks about it, he thinks it's going to do all kinds of evil. He's actually calling for the government to regulate artificial intelligence because he thinks it's going to be destructive. And once these systems get going, they're going to advance so rapidly that they're going to be smarter than their makers are. And there have been demonstrations of this where a computer was taught the rules of a certain game like chess. And then the computer was allowed to start playing chess using artificial intelligence, taking note of all of the different options and operations and responses, and just building and building and building knowledge of all of the possible options and possible reactions and so on. And the computers become unbeatable. They just advance in skill so rapidly. And what Elon Musk warns about is what's going to happen when these machines begin advancing in areas beyond games. Who's going to control these machines, and how are they going to be kept from becoming destructive? And so we're seeing one early crisis caused by the simplest application of artificial intelligence, which is its use by students to get answers to questions. Answers that are spontaneously composed. So technically, no one's copying any other person's work. Technically, it's not plagiarism. It's not stealing someone else's work. The artificial intelligence bot is intended to provide its users with answers. That's what it's for. So what is a teacher or a professor going to say? The student isn't stealing, isn't copying someone else's work. The student is simply using technology. And now, as the technology is criticized, the student looks around and finds the school is entirely oriented around math and science and technology. They're constantly being told how awesome technology is, and yet the school is turning around and prohibiting them from using the technology. And this is the crisis that's developing in modern education, and it's developing very rapidly today. Now, the problem with this is, like I said, the modern schools abandoned, and when I say modern schools, I'm talking beginning back in the 1500s. This was a problem that the ancient philosophers warned about. Socrates warned about fake learning. He warned about fake education and fake ideas about knowledge. He warned that books and writing was dangerous. But that went on. The printing press developed. The ancient philosophical education was abandoned. Modern encyclopedic learning replaced ancient philosophical learning. The idea of compulsory education, where everyone is required to go to school to earn some kind of certificate or diploma, was invented. And as I said, as technology didn't exist, it appeared to be okay. But as time goes on, the problem that this fake education exposes us to is being revealed. We have not devoted ourselves to studies and works proper for human beings. We have accepted a lazy, shallow, and counterfeit idea of education and knowledge in general. And in the information age, we're going to learn that if we limit learning to this shallow, informational type, encyclopedic knowledge of things, to being smart, computers are going to be more effective in this kind of learning than human beings are. And human beings, the majority of men, are going to be replaced with a small number of machines. In most of these fields of study, most of these industries, there's not going to be any more work for men in any area where the work being done by the men is actually beneath the dignity of human beings. All of this lazy, shallow, modern employment is going to disappear unless our society just chooses to destroy computers, which of course they're not going to do. What's so attractive about computers and technology to the powerful is that a small number of people, through the assistance of computers and machines, and now to an even greater degree through artificial intelligence, can control whole industries. The wealthiest and powerful people, they're not interested in hiring and working with human beings. Every time you see in the news a story of workers going on strike, workers complaining about conditions, realize that the owners of those companies and leaders of those industries are shaking their heads saying, we have to free ourselves from these human workers. We can't have our industry dependent on these human workers. So computers aren't going anywhere. They're part of the whole system. The wealthiest men in the world, if you look, most of them are connected to modern computing. Globalization in general, without computers, is impossible. Without technology and machines, it's impossible. The US military, as an example, wouldn't even exist without its technology. We don't throw human beings at enemies anymore. We send unmanned drones controlled by a small number of men hundreds of miles away, working on computers with joysticks to drop GPS laser-guided missiles to direct hits on targets hundreds of miles away. from our soldiers. Technology is not going to disappear. It's at the center of this whole modern world system. But we're seeing the crises on the ground begin to develop, and they're going to get worse. It's going to be very difficult for men and women to find employment because computers can do their work better and faster than they can. Education is going to have no purpose because no one receiving the modern education, even though they cheat through the system and get the degree, what they're ignoring is the fact that it's computers doing their work that are allowing them to cheat through the system, and those computers are going to be there when it's time to work as well, not to help them with the work, but to do the work instead of them. If anyone was smart about this and should protest, it should be the students, but they're not smart enough. They think they're getting away with something. They think they're clever. They think they're beating the system, whereas they're actually surrendering their future to these bots, search engines, artificial intelligence apps, and so on. And every time they use them, every time they enter a search, every time they provide feedback, they're making the bots smarter and smarter and smarter. But there's no telling them these things. Now, what would protect men from these things was true religion. What protects me from cheating is my desire to please God. What made me want to study, not to simply get my degree, but to actually understand my field of study, was my desire to serve God with that knowledge. And when we degrade education to mere degree chasing or certificate collecting, we create the opportunity for technology to take over. And that's what's happened over the past several centuries. And now that the technology has established itself so firmly, we're running into a Frankenstein-like situation where people are going to realize the consequences when it's too late to fix them. And the powerful people in society are already going to have their hands all over these tools, and there's going to be no turning back. Now, what's going to happen? What would happen if this mechanized, computerized society developed where a small number of people did all of the work by the use of computers and machines and artificial intelligence? Well, no one would have any work to do. The government already knows this. And this is why, as the next election season draws near, pay attention to the talk about universal basic income. Universal basic income is the idea that the government should simply distribute to people wealth for them to use to purchase their basic needs. Now, the government has, of course, always done this, and conservatives even fight for this. If you listen to talk about school vouchers, for example, it's basically saying government funding for education should be given to individuals for them to use to pay for their children's education. that whole idea of vouchers, which is popular among conservatives, is contrary to everything conservative. But even modern conservatives are already too far down the stream to fight for real conservative principles. The fight between conservatives and liberals today is no longer about limiting government power and maintaining a free capitalistic market. The argument between conservatives and liberals today is simply how the government money is going to be distributed. To which programs, to which people, to which groups, to which institutions, and so on. Both sides of the American political party system have already gone all in on constantly expanding government power. And what makes this government power possible is this growing technology. So at election time, you're going to hear more and more talk about universal basic income. And a few years ago, the idea sounded insane. The idea that the government would simply give citizens a basic income, let's say $1,000 a month, sounded insane. And politicians who proposed it were just sort of laughed off. But then when the COVID crisis developed, we watched as the government sent checks for hundreds or thousands of dollars to all American families. And the thought of that was amazing. How can our government afford to send, $1 trillion to the American citizens? What in the world is going on? How has this thing gone from the citizens funding the government to now the government funding the citizens? And we watched as this happened during COVID, where the so-called stimulus checks were mailed to every American household. I really couldn't believe it. The idea seemed so crazy, and you realize that this idea of universal basic income is simply a matter of when. And the reason why the universal basic income is going to be necessary is because all of the major industries are going to turn to machines and computers and artificial intelligence, and they're going to push human workers out of the market, out of the economy, out of the workplace, I should say. Because human workers are a waste of money. You may object to that and say, that's not, no. Human workers, as they have chosen to live and think and work, are a waste of money. And the leaders of these industries, the shareholders, the government officials, they're going to realize that they're going to profit the most by moving to this technology. They're going to leave most Americans with no work to do. And the answer to that problem is going to be universal basic income. It's going to be a giant, really communist system, a giant welfare society that presents itself as doing business. So it's going to look capitalistic, but it's going to be sort of an actual communist society where the people are simply assigned their income without any real work to do. And I honestly have no idea what Americans are going to do in such a society. Probably what we see in the ghetto, which is just indulge in creature comforts and get into more and more trouble. And this is the long-term outcome, of modern education. This brave new world that was invented by enemies of scholastic philosophy and traditional Catholic culture, who don't want God to be maintained as the end of human life and society, but who turn their attention to worldly concerns, worldly ambitions, worldly undertakings, and so on, which degenerates human society and human learning and leaves human beings to stand around with their mouths hanging open as they watch machines and computers work in ways that appear almost magical. And this is where we're headed, and it's starting to manifest itself in our schools and colleges and universities. And these schools and colleges and universities, while they'll fuss about it, they'll complain about it, they'll whine about it, they'll pretend to be upset about it and offended. You'll hear all these Christian professors, Catholic college professors, and school teachers complaining about it. But this is what they have chosen. This is the modern educational system that they have not examined, they have not resisted. They know, any of them that are slightly intelligent know that what they are doing in their institutions with their students is not what past generations did. They know that. They boast about their innovation. They boast about the changes that they've made. They mock and criticize what they know was done in the past. And now that it begins to bear its fruit, they're going to pretend, and it's all just an act. They're going to pretend to have some higher standard or some moral concerns where they have scoffed at warnings about these problems their whole career. I've sat and talked about these things with Catholic college professors, and I know for certain, because I've talked about it to them in their presence, looking in their eyes, I know for certain they understand what the problems are. And I'd have these discussions and we'd get back to work and go back to our own things, and I would wait, hopefully, to see some change and see them go right back to their normal activity. So I know that college professors are aware of the situation because I've told them directly. I know they're aware that they're not doing what saints did in the past in Catholic education. And now that the fruits begin to show themselves more and more, and these traitors to Catholic tradition are left to face the consequences of what they've done to earn their living, they're going to pretend to be opposed to it. They're going to pretend to offer some resistance to it. But if you keep an eye on it, you're going to find that it's just an act. They're not going anywhere. They're not changing anything. They're not doing anything different. They're simply pretending to be attacked by this Frankenstein that they have arrogantly helped to create. And it's going to be found in Catholic schools, which have followed the modern schools in almost every way. It's going to manifest itself in Catholic colleges and universities, which are just copies of modern secular universities. And this crisis is going to leave everyone conscious of the fact that these kids aren't necessarily learning anything, that these certificates and degrees don't represent anything other than tuition payments and attendance in these classes. The value of these diplomas and institutions is going to decline, and they're going to crash. They're going to crash unless they're somehow sustained artificially, as they already are. They're already dependent entirely upon government funding that's not sustainable. But this reality that these institutions are basically dead men walking is going to be manifested. And it's already beginning to be manifested. Artificial intelligence, the next wave of technology, might just be the last blow that finally brings this whole system down. And so the question is, what will replace it? And we don't know. There will be some secular, worldly, counterfeit innovation, and all the Christians will hop on board because they need paychecks. They'll all hop on board, and there'll be Christianized versions of the new innovations, the new fads. But what I believe wisdom teaches us is that we should cling to the timeless foundations of true human learning, and we should not build our house upon this sand of modern thought, modern society, modern government, modern education and fads, modern technology, and so on. We have to be careful in using it strategically, minimally. But we can't embrace the whole system as modern schools have done, modern colleges have done. What I believe Catholic families should do is commit to homeschooling, and I think that they should return to classical Catholic studies and rebuild their family culture on that solid ground of proven, timeless tradition. And let me just say this, I have given my own children a classical Catholic education, and they had no problem moving on as adults. So all of this talk, all of these timid warnings about the dangers that kids are going to face if they're not immersed in modern society, it's all baloney. Just excuses. I gave my children, and I'm continuing to give my children, an education that as a Catholic I can be very confident in, would be approved by saints and doctors of the Church, and regardless of my children's reaction to it, because that's none of my business, I know that I have fulfilled my duties, which are objective and measurable. And this is where I think Catholic parents are getting duped. They're being duped by talk about how they can control the outcomes of their children's education, which is impossible. They're being led to neglect Christian duties because they're told that it will offend their kids or cause their kids to be frustrated, which is impossible to prove. And rather than focusing on our objective duties as Catholic parents, we get into this talk about modern methods and techniques and what's relevant and what the kids will respond to, and it all turns out to be baloney in the end. The only thing that is left when we try to follow modern fads and sort of control like robots our children's intellectual and spiritual lives, we're left with guilt and regret as parents. We're left regretting that we didn't just stick to the faith, that we didn't just stick to what was certain, but we allowed ourselves to listen to all these so-called experts and advisors telling us to come away from what we're comfortable with, to come away from what we're confident in, to come away from what we know is true, and to follow them on these innovative modern paths so that we can bring about some effect, only to find that no such effect came about. If we focus on our duties and follow our conscience, no matter what our children choose in their adult lives, in their own free will, we will have peace of mind knowing that we delivered to them the Catholic faith. This is what we need to focus on, not allow ourselves to be duped into thinking that a certain new, unproven, innovative method or program or system will be more effective in educating our children than what the doctors and saints of the church did and tell us to do. But this is being revealed by these emerging AI bots and applications. And I encourage you to take a minute and just Google AI bots and the destruction of education. If you Google that, I think that a link to that New York Times article will be visible, and I encourage you to check that out. I'll put a link to that article in the description of this video as well. So I hope that that's helpful. I want to warn you because I believe that as Catholic parents, we have to protect our consciences. We have to follow our consciences and not allow ourselves to be led away by these false promises that are never fulfilled. And we do these things, we make these decisions at the cost of our future peace of mind. Don't allow yourself to get duped into these things and then live the rest of your life in regret, wishing that you had just stuck to what you knew was true. If you find these talks helpful, please do me a favor and share them with your friends. Share them on social media. Share them with fellow Catholics you think might benefit from them. But a simple share, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. These things affect how our videos appear in search results. They make them more visible to other families and so on. So it's a very simple way to help. Just share, subscribe, like, and so on. I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions or want to get into any of these things in more detail, just let me know and we'll continue to talk about them, think about them, discuss them, and try to avoid these troubles in our own lives. God bless.